This week is Easter week, and we're very excited about Easter. Okay. That was pretty good for about half of you, and the rest of you, you'll catch on. You'll catch on. Right? So I want you to know that I know that we have different kinds of people here today. Some of you haven't been to this church before. It's your first time. Welcome. Really glad to have you here. Some of you are like, you've been followers of Christ for a long time. You're looking for a church home, and you thought Easter is a good time to check it out. We are really glad that you're joining us, whether you're in here or in our lobby. We've got some overflow out there and online. Really thankful to have you guys here. Some of you, you didn't come here today under your own free will. Someone either bribed you with lunch, or a parent was like, no, seriously, if you want your allowance, you're going. And so you're here, and you're like, you'll do it, but it's not really your thing. Some of you, we love you guys, but we know that we only see you twice a year, and this is one of those times. And so we're glad to see you on Easter. We're glad to see you on Christmas, and maybe come back next week so we can have a really good time talking about hell. So we... And some of you are here, like, you basically got like a church bingo card or a church checklist, right? You're just trying to figure out, like, are we going to do all the things that I want to do on Easter? Because there's some things I have some expectations, right? I want to make sure that we meet them. Like, is there going to be an Easter egg hunt? Yep, we did that. Is there going to be a sermon on resurrection? I'm contractually obligated to do that. So what about, like, are we going to chant He is risen indeed together? Yeah, we totally did that. Well, surely then also the pastor will wear something dressier than a red hoodie. I'm sorry about that one. That one didn't work out so well for you. But the rest of them you got, so you should probably be happy to get 75%. We're going to be in the book of Luke in chapter 24. If you'd like to follow along in your Bibles, we'd love for you to join us. We'll also have the words up here on the screen. Luke 24, verses 1 through 3. Just before we jump in, just a little bit of background. It's a story that probably, whether it's your first time in a church or not, there's a good chance that you've heard it told somewhere in our culture. Jesus rises up and teaches against the Jewish religious establishment, the dominant religious establishment of his people, and he teaches against the most powerful empire the world had ever known up until that time. And Jesus then, like sometimes happens when you rise up against those who are in power, dies. He pays a price for it. They make sure that he is crushed, killed. And so he's dead. And all of his disciples are terrified. They scatter, they run away. Like, if they arrested him and they killed him, we thought he was going to overthrow the Roman Empire. We thought he was going to give us power and control that we've been seeking. We thought that that was his purpose. And if they've captured him, if they've arrested him, if they've tried him, found him guilty and crucified him, they might do the same for us. So all of the men who followed after Jesus, just like, earlier, like Peter, right, one of his disciples, cut off the ear of a soldier who tried to arrest him. Peter, big and bold, like, I got this, Jesus. And then, like, suddenly Jesus arrests him. Peter's like, oh, actually, I'm over here. Like, he was terrified. It's the women who hung around. Thank God for the strong ladies in the story. The women hung around. And so in Luke 24, it's such a funny thing to applaud. In Luke 24, we see this. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and they went to the tomb. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. This was surprising. It's not what they expected. They had come there with a duty and obligation. They want to take care of this man. That's not what they were expecting at all. So while they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, we're about to read the quote that the men said to them. There will be a part of this where you probably need to cheer out loud. It should be obvious by the size of the font when we get to that part. Okay, so why do you look for the living among the dead? The men said. He is not here. He has risen. Not bad. Not bad. All right, so here is the story, and many of you have heard it like thousands and thousands of times at this point. Maybe those of you even who, like, church is not your normal thing, you might be familiar at least with the story. Jesus was killed, he was crucified, and Christians believe he rose again. Now, a lot of Easters, lots of other pastors have spent time trying to provide some reasonable evidence as to why perhaps you should believe that the resurrection is possible. Like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but almost every time that someone dies, they stay dead. That's something I've noticed. Maybe you haven't. It's okay. Not all of us are observant, but that's what I've noticed. And so when somebody says, well, yeah, but this one guy, he died, but then he didn't stay dead. He rose from the dead. And it's like, well, okay, that sounds a lot like a fairy tale. And if that helps you sleep better at night, I guess you can hold on to that. But there's actually really good evidence. Most scholars, even those who would consider themselves atheists, agnostics, don't believe the story. Most scholars believe that Jesus was real, that he existed, and that there was an empty tomb, and that we have to do something with that. So what do you do with the empty tomb? And it's just my belief that, like, the more you look into it, the more plausible it seems. Like, oh, maybe this thing actually happened. Maybe all these people overnight in the course of a few weeks started worshiping this guy who they should have been running from because he was dead, started worshiping him because they actually experienced something of him. Now, we've spent sermons talking lots about that. Last fall, we did a series called Who Needs God? And if you'd like to know more about why the resurrection is plausible to put your belief in, that's a great series to check out. We're not going to spend time on that today. Today, I want to talk about instead, not like should we believe it. I think we should, but obviously, like some of you won't find that persuasive. I want to talk about why it matters. Like, why does it, if Jesus rose from the dead, like, what does that even mean for me? Why would I be excited about that? Why celebrate that fact? Even if I agree that it's a fact that happened in human history, what is that about? And so to do that, I want to start actually with a quote, an excerpt from a book called Gone Girl that was written by Gillian Flynn and came out a few years ago. And I really like this quote because the character in the story is writing a journal, a diary, and they talk about the general malaise that many of us find ourselves living in right now. And I just want to see if maybe in this quote from Gone Girl, you see something of yourself. And it's a bit of a longer quote, a longer excerpt than I usually use, but I felt like all of it was kind of important. Here's what the character writes in the book. For several years, I had been bored. Not a whining, restless child's boredom, but a dense, blanketing malaise. It seemed to me that there was nothing new to be discovered ever again. Our society was utterly, ruinously derivative. We were the first human beings who would never see anything for the first time. We stare at the wonders of the world, dull-eyed, underwhelmed. Mona Lisa, the pyramids, the Empire State Building, jungle animals on attack, ancient icebergs collapsing, volcanoes erupting. I can't recall a single amazing thing I have seen firsthand that I didn't immediately reference to a movie or a TV show. A stupid commercial. No, she didn't use the word stupid in the book. You know the awful sing-song of the blasé. Seen it. I've literally seen it all. And the worst thing is, the secondhand experience is always better. The image is crisper, the view is keener, the camera angle and the soundtrack manipulate my emotions in a way reality can't anymore. I don't know that we are actually human at this point. Those of us who are like most of us, who grew up with TV and movies and now the internet. Now check out this last part. If we are betrayed, we know the words to say. When a loved one dies, we know the words to say. If we want to play the stud or the smartass or the fool, we know the words to say. Why? Because we are all working from the same dog-eared script. How many of us kind of feel that in our bones? Like we'll never see anything really new for the first time. It's always a reenactment of a secondhand experience we once had. 2,500 years before Gillian Flynn wrote Gone Girl, a writer of a book called Ecclesiastes said it similarly, but a lot more succinctly. And they just wrote, I've seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. There's this idea that we are jumping into one life experience after the other, and we are told by our culture, by our society, that if you'll just do this, you'll finally find meaning, right? If you'll just go to college, if you'll just get that job, or if you'll just start down that career path, if you'll just marry this kind of person, if you'll just have these types of children, very hard to determine which types of children you're going to choose to have. If you'll just do these things, then you will find fulfillment. And we find ourselves jumping into these experiences, and then oftentimes they lead to disappointment. And we see ourselves asking questions like, is that all there is? Because I thought there'd be more. Seen it. When I was in college, I played a lot of video games. Too many. I played too many video games in college. I got really good at Halo and Call of Duty. I was very, very good at those. You might know somebody who plays video games too often. You might think like, yeah, I know someone who's actually really, really good. Yeah, I was better. I was very good. My grades suffered for it. That's how good I was. And then I got out of college. I started a job. I played video games less. I got married. I played video games less. I had children. I forgot what a video game was. A few years ago, when my sons were 6 years old and 3 years old, I tucked them in one night. My wife, Emily, she's a nurse. She was going to go to work the next morning, so she went to bed kind of early. And so I was up, and I was like browsing the internet to see what was new. And I found out that this new game had just come out for the PlayStation 4, and it was a Spider-Man game. I loved Spider-Man as a kid, and I hadn't, at this point, played video games in several years. So I thought, well, I'll just jump on the PlayStation Store. I'll buy it, download it real fast, and I'll play it for 15 or 20 minutes and go to bed. So I downloaded it. I started playing it about 10 o'clock. So at 3:45 in the morning, I decided I should probably call it. And so I turned the PlayStation 4 off. I went to bed. My children then woke me up at 7 a.m. because they are horrible human beings. And they demanded breakfast, right? So I went downstairs with them, and I'm trying to pour cereal out with one bloodshot eye. And I get their cereal, and I'm sitting at the table, and my head's nodding. I'm like, I got to do something to wake myself up. And I thought, I'll go play Spider-Man. So I left them there, and I went into the living room, and I fired the PlayStation up, and I started playing Spider-Man. And then my son Jack ran in. He's 6 years old at the time, and he's got his mouth full of cereal. Dad, is that a Spider-Man game? And I was like, I know what you're going to ask next. You're going to ask if you can play it, right? That's what he's going to do. And instead he said, Dad, can I watch you play it? Can you ever, son? Children, gather around. Watch the spectacle of your father defeating the scorpion and Dr. Octopus. Yes, I do this for you. So I had them come to the living room, and they would start watching me. And one of the really fun parts of the game is that the more people you beat, missions you accomplish, the more costumes you can unlock. And each costume has like a different special item or feature or attack mode. And so you can see kind of the previews of the costumes, and it tells you what you have to do to get them. And so they were like, oh, get that one. So we were walking through, getting all the missions. This, by the way, is how grown men play Barbie. So we were... yeah. So we're walking through, we're getting all the costumes. Like, this is the Spider-Man 2099 costume. Like, real people who love Spider-Man would know that. And so we got this costume. And then what I noticed is that we were so excited, so hyped to get each one, that when finally we had unlocked enough coins or unlocked enough missions to do it, it was like, yeah, we got it. And we'd try it out. And like, look at this trick you can do. And it was really, really exciting. But about 10 minutes after we unlocked the new costume, it was just, seen it. Let's get the next costume. Is that all there is? I thought there'd be more. And for many of us, we understand the experience of feeling like fulfillment and purpose is always just over the horizon. If I can just unlock the next thing, if I can just get the next thing, if I can just level up, if I just get the promotion, if I can just get married, if I can just have those kids, if I can just get more education, I will finally feel fulfilled. Jim Carrey once said that he wishes everyone could be successful and have all their dreams come true so that they could see that that's not the answer. So today, I want to talk about the resurrection and how it enters into this malaise that we kind of feel when nothing else quite fulfills us, nothing else quite fills us up. So I want to start by talking about disappointment. Disappointment. So disappointment is what happens when you have an expectation that's here, and then your reality, your experience of reality is here, or here, or here, right? Disappointment is what happens. Disappointment is the gap between what you expected and what you experienced. That's disappointment. And so for many of us, when we expect like a relationship or a job or a new offer, something to like fill us up, and it doesn't quite do that, then we feel like there is just a major, major gap between that. My wife, Emily, wanted to become a nurse, and so she went to nursing school, and nursing school is hard, by the way. She had already gotten a 4-year degree, and then she had to get but it wasn't in nursing, so then she had to get an additional 2-year degree to get her RN license. And I remember there were mornings where she had to get up really early and go in, and I would sit in the tub while she showered. I would sit in the tub with no water in it, and I would read her flashcards of prescription medications that she had to memorize. I couldn't pronounce 3/4 of the words on them. I was like, this one's called, I don't know, like, does that mean anything to you? Like, it was that kind of conversation. I remember that. And then I remember she thought, I'll start, and I will care for these patients, and I will serve these patients, and these patients will appreciate the care and the support, and they will care for me, they will love me back. So patients don't always do that. When we're sick and not feeling well, we're not always at our best, right? And so a lot of times we're just grumpy or grouchy. And even if we're comatose, our family members are grumpy or grouchy who came with us, right? And so I remember she would get, especially like older men would sometimes just say inappropriate things to her, you know? Like my wife's very pretty. I'm very thankful for that. I definitely married way out of my league, and I try not to remind her that. But she's here this morning, so babe, if you could just plug the ears for a second. So, I remember she was about 8 months pregnant with my son Jack, and she walked into this older gentleman's room to take care of him, and she had been doing a great job with him. They had a good rapport, and then he looked at her and he said, "How far along are you?" She said, "I'm about 8 months," and he said, "Wow. You and your husband still able to get it on?" And my wife, being so kind and so sweet, gave him a second chance. She just looked at him and said, "Do you mean, am I having a good pregnancy?" And he said, Yeah, that's what I mean. And she said, yes, I'm having a good pregnancy. Thank you so much for asking. And she left the room without giving him a blanket. So that was kind of like the experience, right, of what the job actually is and how people actually treat you versus what you hope it will be. She has a friend who just a few weeks ago was talking about some of the difficulties they had in nursing. They were working in the ER at one point in their career, and this is when they just decided they didn't want to work in the ER anymore. They had a patient code. A lot of times when a patient codes, that means like they are on the doorstep of death, cardiac arrest or something. Something has to be done immediately to make sure that they don't die. There were no other nurses around, so this nurse got on top of the bed and was doing chest compressions with one hand while giving an IV into the arm, like putting medicine to their IV in the other arm at the same time. While she's doing this, another patient walked up and tugged on her shirt sleeve and said, I can see you're kind of busy right now, but when you get a chance, can I please have a warm blanket? She said, not a good time. Expectation, the job will be like this. It'll be wonderful. It'll be like reality. Oh, it's not quite what I thought it would be. And over time, we either adjust or we just kind of live in like a malaise of disappointment, right? Malaise of disappointment. Sometimes we might even get up. We might decide like, oh, well, maybe the problem isn't that I got the wrong job. Maybe I just need to work harder, right? I saw an interview with Tom Brady a few weeks ago, and he was actually talking with a group of college students. And he talked about how he didn't even make the high school team. Like in a team that went 0-8 and while he was in high school, he didn't make the high school team. He was actually way better at baseball. So he practiced. And he was like, I'm not going to have any other hobbies. I'm not going to play any other sports. I'm not going to have any friends. And Tom Brady still doesn't have any friends. You win that many championships, I won't talk to you, okay? So she's like, I'm not going to have any, I'm just going to practice. I'm just going to get better. And his message to this group of students was, if you want to be the best, you need to know that you're competing against people who will be so singularly focused that they will put everything else in their life aside in order to only do that. That is your competition. Well, does that make us happy? Or is that more chasing after the wind, more disappointment? I don't know. Some people you would think have reached the pinnacle that they should be so happy, but then they keep retiring and then unretiring. And you start thinking maybe 7 Super Bowl championships isn't even enough. We're never satisfied. Is that all there is? I thought there'd be more. Seen it. The Epicureans, group of philosophers, their philosophy can kind of be summed up in this way. They just became so disappointed, they just basically said, look, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. You know? More recently, a wonderful philosopher, Mary Jane, said, if you expect disappointment, then you can never really be disappointed, right? The question that everybody's asking behind all this is, must tomorrow be a repeat of today? Is it just going to keep going like this? Is it just going to keep going? Perhaps this is why some of the first disciples of Jesus, when they talked about his death and resurrection, they talked about it in these terms. They said, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Does anybody here have a baby I could borrow, like a freshly made baby? We see that anywhere? So over here, yep. Can you come on up with the freshly made baby? And he's asleep, I see. Well, this is going to go great. So... So the first disciples use the illustration of new life. I'm going to pop over here into the darkness for just a moment. Thank you so much, and I'll bring him right back. Hey, baby. Hey, baby. Oh. This is Jaden. Say hello, Jaden. Yes, say it very quietly. I appreciate it. Thank you. Now, when I first walked out into the light with Jaden, there was a sound in this room. It was a sound of, aw. Even the men in the room were like, oh. Why is that? What is it about a baby that opens up our hearts? Is it possible that it's because when we see a baby, we see pure potential? Jaden's heart has never been broken at this point. No one's ever turned a cold shoulder toward him, never misunderstood him. He's never experienced a dark night of the soul. And so we look at Jaden and we just see like pure possibility and potential. Who will you be? What will you see? Maybe you'll join the Lakers one day and help them actually make the playoffs. When we see a baby like Jaden, we start to kind of think, what would it be like to go back and do it all over again? What would it be like to have everything in front of you and nothing behind you? See, that's kind of the promise of new life. Can you give Jaden a little hand? A little round of applause. Thank you. He is adorable. So that's why these first disciples, when they started talking about what it is that Jesus did, they started talking about it in terms of new birth. How many of us wish that we could go back and do it all over again? How many of us have been struggling with the disappointment of life? We had this expectation, but we've experienced this kind of reality, and the gap between that almost feels unbearable at times. So why the resurrection? Why the death and resurrection of Jesus? Why does that matter? Because if the question is, must tomorrow look the same, right? Must tomorrow always be like today? Do we have to just keep going on in this kind of cycle? The answer that Peter gives us here is actually because of the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you've been given new birth. The world is not the same. Things have changed because he is not here. He has risen. That's the promise. That's the promise. So that's what happens to our disappointment. What about our shame? Right? What about the things that I did I feel bad about, I feel kind of guilty about? Like the question, I think, when you have shame, like it's this idea that there's something looming behind me, like almost a black balloon that I'm just carrying around that's just slightly overhead and behind. It's just there all the time. The ways that I've hurt people, the ways that I've damaged the world, the ways that I haven't lived a good, a true, a beautiful life, like I hold on to that stuff sometimes. And sometimes I define myself like by that stuff. But does my past determine my future? Am I just on this inevitable course of disappointment and shame? Is that what I'm headed down? By the way, this starts very early on in life. Last evening, we had an Easter egg hunt here as well, and we had a number of kids come up to us afterwards. They were like, "Oh man, my Easter eggs are empty," and we were like, "What?" Like I saw our staff spent a lot of time loading Easter eggs up this week. Your Easter eggs shouldn't be empty. What happened? Well, here's what happened. We told all of them that you could only get 10 eggs, and so they all got 10 eggs. And then they realized, well, if I open other eggs and just put the things in my bag and put the egg back, I didn't get more than 10 technically. Children are evil from the very beginning, okay? This is what I want us to just understand. It starts right away. So it starts with eggs, but before long, you're backstabbing people. You're breaking promises. You're treating others in a way that you know in your heart, even at the time, this isn't right. You justify it. But a lot of times when we look back on what we did, we feel shame. Did anyone here happen to bring with them a bag of groceries? Do we have anybody that brought a bag of groceries? Oh, yeah, right there. Can you bring it up here real fast? That'd be super helpful. Okay. So imagine that you live on a street with a family. Thank you so much, I appreciate it. And yeah, Pop-Tarts. Good choices, sir. So imagine that you live on a street with a family, right? And this family, turns out they have had a really rough time. They had some medical expenses, and their insurance didn't cover a lot of it, so they're up to their neck in medical bills. And they've got some student loan debt that they're still paying off, and for some of this is already feeling familiar, isn't it? And then they've got some credit cards. Probably they made some bad decisions at times, but also they were just so strapped sometimes that they were occasionally putting groceries on credit cards when they were younger, and they're still working to pay that stuff off. They both have jobs. They're working to get out of debt. That stuff's going okay. And then after the medical bill gets piled onto everything else, they both end up losing their jobs within just a matter of weeks from each other. So they go and they try to find more work, and there is more work. They're able to find jobs in other places, but the amount of money that they're bringing home now compared to what they were making before just doesn't come nearly close enough to covering all their expenses. So they have a little bit tucked away in savings, but as the weeks roll by, that savings is starting to run out. And used to, when they went to the grocery store, they didn't have to really think about it. We would just go and find what we wanted, and we would load it up, and we would head out. But groceries are getting more expensive, and the money is starting to run out. And now when you go into their kitchen, if you start to open up some of the cabinets and the cupboards, you can see the back of the cupboard, which you never used to be able to see before. And they've got 2 kids, and the kids are young, and they haven't talked to the kids about all this financial anxiety and stress and they're feeling, but the kids understand. They just kind of intuit that something's not right. And so one day they decide, you know what, if it keeps going like this, we're not actually going to be able to make the mortgage payment anymore. Maybe we could go talk to the bank and see if we could negotiate something where they could give us some time or some space or lower our payment for a season, or maybe we could just pay interest for a while. We'll go and have that conversation, and so they do. And the conversation, it doesn't go well. So they come home that afternoon after picking the kids up from school, and they get the kids in bed, and they sit down that night for what feels like the 1,000th time in the last several weeks with pen and paper and spreadsheets, and they're just trying to work out how do the numbers work. And when they finally get to the end of it, they realize, we're going to lose the house. There's no way to keep it. And that's going to cause like a sense of anxiety and stress in their marriage that they've never known before. And so in the back of both of their minds, neither one of them say it out loud, they're also wondering, like, what does this do to us? What does this do to two people? Is the stress of this situation going to so negatively impact our relationship and our family that our family's not even going to make it? Like, it's losing the house, but it's not just losing the house. What if instead of just losing the house, we also lose the home? And so as they're talking that out and they're stressed about that, they hear a knock on the door, which is weird because it's later at night. It's about 9 o'clock, and people don't normally knock on the door late at night. And so then they go and they open it up, and it's a neighbor, and they're standing there with a bag of groceries. And as they open the door, before they even say anything, the neighbor just like walks in, blows right past them, and goes inside the house. You know the kind of neighbor we're talking about here, okay? And they just go straight over to the kitchen table, and they just take the bag of groceries, and they just stand next to the kitchen table and say like, hey, I got you guys this bag of groceries, and also my car is parked out front, and it is completely loaded down with more bags of groceries. I got as much basically as my car can possibly hold, and so I'm going to need some help bringing it in if that's okay. See, I noticed that you guys like had gotten rid of one of the cars, and I noticed that you just seemed off and down, and so I actually talked to a mutual friend of ours, and they let me know a little bit about your financial situation. I just thought to myself, like, I can't let that stand. And so I brought you a bunch of food, but also I want to know if I can help in other ways. Like, he said you have medical debt? Like, what's the deal with the medical debt? And they tell him a little bit about it. And he says, okay, well, how much is your medical debt? And they're like, well, that feels a little forward, but here's what we owe. So he writes that number down. He's like, you have other debts as well, maybe student loans? They're like, yeah, we have student loan debt. And he's like, well, what's that? And they're like, geez, nosy. Okay, well, it's here. So he writes that down as well. And he's like, you have credit card debts? And they say, okay, a little bit. Yeah, we do. Here's the number. So he writes that number down. And then he says, how much do you owe on the house? And they say, well, the monthly payment is, no, not the monthly payment. He says, I want to know, what do you owe on the house? And they give him that number as well. And he says, anything else? And they say, that's it. So he says, well, I need to grab a checkbook. Did anybody bring a checkbook that I can use? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so he grabs a checkbook. And if you're under 30, you're probably thinking, what's a checkbook? And that's a great question. It's like paper Venmo. Okay, So he grabs the checkbook, and he says, all right, so all these numbers, I added these up, I got this number. Does that seem like the right number? And they said, well, yeah, that's the number. It's a really large number, and it actually feels more overwhelming to have it all added up and to look at it than it did before. And he said, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write that number here on this check, but then I'm going to add a 0 to it because I don't want you to stress about anything. I want you to have more than enough. Can you imagine what it would feel like to just in a matter of moments move from thinking that we owe so much, we can never pay it, and we may not survive it, to feeling like we have such an abundance, we don't even know what to do with the excess? When the first Christians started talking about what Jesus' death and resurrection had done, they said it like this at one point: He forgave us all our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. In other words, like all that shame that follows us around, the mistakes that we made, the stuff in our past, the things that we don't talk to other people about, the things that like late at night, as we're about to fall asleep, they enter our minds, or sometimes first thing in the morning, and like we feel like, man, we could never actually get that millstone off from around our neck. It's the thing that weighs us down. It defines us in our minds as to who we are. I can't possibly be better than that. I have that as part of my history, as part of my past. And it's as if Jesus knocked on the door and said, like, you know what? There is nothing you have done that I won't cover, and then some. I've got it all. And through my death and my resurrection, I will take sin itself, shame itself, guilt itself on my shoulders, and you don't have to deal with it again, which means every time those shameful thoughts come up about who we were and what we did, we're able to look those thoughts right in the eye, and we're able to proclaim, He is not here. He has risen. That's what Jesus does. And finally, death. Death. Something that feels like it gets us down, something that feels like it adds to the malaise. My great-grandfather was 96 years old when he passed away. And at some point in your life, you start to realize that you are going to die. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the latest stats. Barna Research Group just released them last week. 1 out of every 1 person dies. It's like holding steady. at some point in your life, you start to realize that you will die. You usually don't think of that like when you're in your teens or sometimes even your 20s. Some of you don't figure out till you're well into your 50s. But at some point, you start to realize, I'm not going to be here forever. And oftentimes, if you make it even a little bit, like 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, certainly 70s, 80s, 90s, you start making it farther and farther along, and you start to see more and more people who you care deeply about not be able to continue the journey with you. You lose parents. You lose aunts and uncles. You lose high school friends and college friends. They don't make it. And at some point, you live long enough, you start to feel almost like you're the only one left. Like, am I just going to be on this journey? Am I going to end it almost all by myself? My great-grandfather was 96 years old when he died. And he used to joke, he used to say that his favorite thing about being 96 years old was the fact that there was no peer pressure. All of his peers had died a long time ago, which was a funny joke and a sad reality. Because there can get a point in life where we just start to wonder, like, man, am I just managing a slow decline into death? Is that what life ends up being about? Because I thought there'd be more. I thought there'd be more. So, the Apostle Paul, one of the very first Christian leaders, wrote this: having disarmed the powers and the authorities, he, Jesus, made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. What a weird turn of phrase. Anybody happen to bring boxing gloves with them today? Any boxing gloves? You got them right here. Thank you so much. I'm so happy. You guys bring awesome stuff with you to church. Thank you. Last night, a friend of mine was here with their daughter, 10-year-old daughter, and their 10-year-old daughter turned to them during this part of the message, and they said, why would someone bring boxing gloves to church? Which is a fair question. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if you've ever done boxing before. I am not a boxer at all, but I did for like one afternoon a few years ago. I went with a friend of mine, and we were able to get into a ring together, and we were able to put like those little helmets on that shield your head a little bit, and they just let us kind of like try to beat each other up a little bit. Now, neither of us knew exactly what we were doing, or even imprecisely what we were doing. We had no idea what we were doing, okay? So we got in the ring, and we just started swinging at each other. And after, like, it didn't take long for us to get pretty into it. Apparently, we'd both been wanting to beat the crap out of each other for a very long time, okay? So we just started taking shots, but we don't really know what we're doing. So we're just, we're just wailing away, trying to hit each other, like dodge, like block, like all that. And we just, after about 45 seconds, I was maybe the most tired I've ever been in my life. I just like, wow, these get heavy fast. Like, you're just giving it everything you got, right? So there's this weird passage in Colossians that says that Jesus triumphed over the powers and the authorities by the cross. He won a victory by dying. That is such a weird way to win anything. And the first 1,000 years of the church, the primary way that we thought about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ was in terms of victory, that he had actually won something, that he had defeated the powers of sin and darkness. And in fact, the idea was, the way the New Testament talks about it, there is actually a pervasive evil force in the world that seems to be at work all the time. Now, some of us may struggle to believe in that concept, but actually I think we've seen it play out a lot. At many times over the course of human history, we've thought, you know what? Society's just going to keep getting better and better. We're going to keep learning more. We're going to have less war. We're going to have less of that stuff. And then what happens? Russia invades Ukraine. Or we see rioting here in the United States in all kinds of ways. And we see injustices happening all around the world, and it starts to call into question. We see a global pandemic. Didn't think that could happen again. We see this stuff, and we start to think, actually, it feels like there is a malevolent force at work in the world, that it is actually pushing itself. Even in your own life, have you ever noticed that if you want to do something good to improve yourself or to help someone else, that ends up being uphill? Everything worthwhile ends up being uphill. Whereas sitting and binge watching Netflix for 17 straight hours takes no effort at all. Right? Bathroom breaks. That's all you got to do. Some of you don't even do that. Just a cup next to the table. It's awkward. Stop inviting us over. So it's like everything worthwhile is uphill, but everything that's not that actually helpful, you can just slide into it. New Testament writers say it's like there's a force at work in the world. And one of the things then that Jesus does through his death and his resurrection is he battles that force. And he has victory over that force. So it's like if you're boxing someone, right? And you actually know what you're doing, and I don't. So those of you who do, just maybe look away for a few minutes, okay? And you're just trying to throw swings, you're trying to uppercuts, jabs, whatever you've got. You're just really putting it on, and you keep connecting with the person too. You're just hitting them over and over and over again. You're like, man, and they just keep taking the hit, taking the blow. You even knock them on their feet a couple times, and they just They just get right back up, right? And if I were in my 20s, I probably would have gone on the floor to illustrate, but nope, I'm 40, so here we go. You just hop right back up, right? And you just punch, and at some point, they even start to taunt you a little bit. They're like, is that all you got? Is that all you got? Maybe I should get my grandma on the phone. I think she's got a little more than you got. Like, is that all you got? And so you just go and you go and you go, and eventually you just completely wear yourself out. It is a weird, unconventional way to win a victory, but it is a victory nonetheless. Why did Jesus have to die on the cross? Jesus died on the cross because he let death take every single shot that it had, pour itself out, and then he got right back up. Is that all you got? Is that the best you can do? Because I'm still standing. I'm still going. The death that we were going to walk into, the sin that was going to eat us alive, every single bit of it like poured itself out on him completely. And it looked like it had won. And then he got back up. Is that all you got? Is that all you got? So he triumphs over them by the cross. He wins the victory by still standing even after death had its worst, which means when we see death and we see suffering in the world, like one of the things that we can ask ourselves, right, is like, why does that exist? And we will be talking about that in the next series. But another thing that we know is that because God is renewing, restoring, and reconciling all things, and he started with Jesus Christ, like he inaugurated something that's not fully yet implemented, but it's already started. And death is going to start reversing itself. When Jesus comes again, that's where the world is headed. A new heavens, a new earth, a new birth right here in this place and right now. So that means when you start to see suffering and you see death in the world, one of the things you're able to do is to obviously grieve that suffering and obviously grieve that death. But the other thing you're able to do is to look it right in the eyes and just be able to say, he is not here. He has risen. So there's this general malaise and this question, is that all there is, right? I thought there'd be more. I've seen C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and gave us such characters as Aslan the lion. Yes, we all love C.S. Lewis. He says this: most people, if they really learn how to look into their own hearts and know that they do want and want acutely something that cannot be had in this world. If I find in myself, he says, desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. That's the way he thought about that. Frederica Matthews Green says it this way: in Orthodoxy, we believe that the central meaning of the resurrection is victory, that Jesus won, that Jesus defeated his enemies. He won a victory. We believe that that is the central meaning. Thus, our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy. Thus, our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy. Thus, our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy. And then rings with a victorious shout. Okay, not bad. I think we need more though. Sam, is Sam around somewhere? Sam? Hey, Sam. Say hi to Sam. What's up, Sam? Good to see you, man. Sam's one of my favorite people. I feel bad for you if you don't know him. So Sam's an awesome guy. Okay, so Sam, maybe help us out with this. I think we could probably take it up even a little bit more. So. You got it? All right, so thus our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy like the clanging of a cymbal. That's not bad. That's not bad. Anybody happen to bring a cowbell with them? Do we have anybody brought it right there? Oh, come on up, my man. Yeah, let's do this. All right, so I just feel like we could probably add a little bit more. So thus our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy like the clashing of a cymbal. Vibrant and noisy like a cowbell. Oh, okay. Here's the problem. I've got a fever. Okay. And the only prescription is more cowbell. Okay. So next time I point you just need to hit it harder and more. Is it okay? Like 5-6 times, you got it? Okay, great. Thus, our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy like the clashing of a cymbal. Vibrant and noisy like more cowbell. Yeah. That's good. All right, now hang out, because I think we could probably still make it a little bit better. Anybody happen to bring bagpipes with them today? Anybody? You bring bagpipes with them? Oh, awesome. Oh, look back there. Okay, great. So maybe you can help us out then, because thus our traditional image is more vibrant and noisy like the clashing of a cymbal. Vibrant and noisy like more cowbell. Yes, vibrant and noisy like the very loud sound of the bagpipes. There we go. Thus, our traditional images are more vibrant and noisy, and they ring with a victorious shout. Therefore, because of resurrection, it wrestles people out of their complacency. It says to people who are struggling with something, with the lie that tomorrow has to be like today, and it says to them, like, that's not true. Because of his death and his resurrection, everything is new. Nothing will ever be the same. And therefore, there are things in our life, things like disappointment, things like shame, things like death, that absolutely at other times we'd be afraid to even think about, focus on at all. But the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ allows us to look them straight in the eye and say, oh, excuse me, he is not here. He has risen. Amen.